A very good morning to you and welcome to the BBA's webinar channel where we discuss the latest issues impacting and affecting banks and regulated firms alongside subject matter experts in the field. My name is Philip Allen, I'm the Director of Learning at the BBA, and today for the next hour to discuss the Apprenticeship Levy, impact and implications for BBA members, I am joined by presenters Karen Woodward, Deputy Director of Employer Relations at the Skills Funding Agency, and Cassandra MacDonald, Head of Professional Services, Apprenticeships at Kaplan. Before Karen kicks us off, may I remind you that this is an interactive webinar in which you can participate in three ways. Number one, by asking questions. Throughout the presentation, just click on the question tab below the screen and type out your question. We will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible. However, if we don't have time to answer your question before the end of the webinar, we'll aim to do so by the end of today. Please note that your questions are anonymous, so no matter how strange or ridiculous you think your question may be, please do fire a question through to the presenters and myself throughout the presentation. And number two, you'll see in the Resources tab below your presentation a great document on FAQs on the levy, which is produced and published by Kaplan for you to download and distribute and socialise to your colleagues. And number three, voting. Throughout this webinar, we want to gauge your opinions by asking you a few simple questions about your understanding of the levy and the progress you have made. To answer any of the questions, just follow the instructions on the screen. I'm just going to go through the topics that we're going to be covering over the next hour or so. And you'll see it on your screen here. The agenda. Number one, what is the levy? Why is the levy being introduced? Number two, what is the apprenticeship levy and who pays it? Three, accessing the levy funds to spend on training, purchasing training, the digital apprenticeship service, provisional funding bans, support for smaller firms, funding rules, how you can prepare for the levy, modelling your levy spend, and how your training provider potentially can help you with this as well. So the first question I'd like to ask is on your screen now, does the levy apply to your firm? So does the levy apply to your firm? What you'll get is a pop-up screen in front of you. If you could click yes, no, or unsure, that would be great. Okay, fantastic. All of you have said absolutely 100% that the levy applies to you. Wonderful. And there's evidence there. Next question. Question number two is, do you know how much levy your firm will have to pay? And do you know how much levy your firm will have to pay on that? And it should pop up just shortly. Yes, no, or unsure. And all of you said, oh, well done, fantastic. Everybody said, yes, they know how much levy they have to pay. Wonderful. Thanks very much for that. That really gives us an insight and understanding that we're dealing with firms who are in the trenches of this at the moment. And it really gives us an understanding of where you are in your journey. Karen, over to you.
Right. Good morning, everybody. Key reasons of why the levy's been introduced are shown on the slide. The key focus of the levy is to help the UK tackle productivity gaps behind other countries. And you can see where the UK fits against the other G7, G8 countries. And it was this particular slide that made the previous Chancellor make the decision that we truly needed to have a levy introduced that made funding for apprenticeships secure in the future. And one of the key reasons, not only around productivity, but at the fact that over the past 15 years, there has been a significant reduction in the amount of money invested by employers in training above and beyond the core requirements of health and safety and induction. And it is redressing that imbalance in the amount of training that people do away from their workplace was another key requirement for why the Chancellor and the government made the decision to introduce the levy. But it will put apprenticeships on a firm financial footing because this money that is collected through the levy will be reinvested directly into apprenticeship training delivery. So, in terms of why apprenticeships, actually all of the evidence says there is an alchemy around apprenticeships. That means the way it's delivered, i.e. teaching people in the workplace, having knowledge, skills and behaviours delivered both externally and internally in the context of the employer, means that they have better return on investment both for employers, and you can see there that employers say 70% of employers said apprenticeships had improved the quality of the service or their product. We know it's good for apprentices. So 83% of apprentices said their career prospects had improved. And actually, it's good for the economy. For every £1 invested in apprenticeships through previous government investment and in future the levy, that there is a typical return to the economy of between £26 and £28 per pound invested. So huge benefits, and why apprenticeships offer that added something different above normal vocational education or academic education. But the programme could be bigger and better. We already know that 70% of employers rate the apprenticeship programme good for their business, 83% of young people or apprentices rate it good for their career. But there is a drive to do more, and actually in two things, both drive up in particular the quality of apprenticeship training and also the number of apprentices trained, because we still have significant numbers of individuals who would want to be apprentices if the opportunity was available to them. So we need more employers to get involved. So a key part of the apprenticeship reform, government recognises that apprenticeships have been good so far, but it wants to make them even better. And it wants to make sure that all of that is done within the next 2 to 3 years. So we are going to have a new institute for apprenticeships led by employers to oversee the development of new apprenticeship standards and to make sure that they offer quality and rigour both for the individual and for the employer. For the first time, apprenticeships will be given equal legal protection to degrees, and we will have apprenticeships right from level 2 through to level 7, and for apprentices of all ages. So this is an all-aged, all-level apprenticeship programme. We do know that government has set some strict targets for the public sector at around about 2.3% of the workforce to be apprentices. And interestingly, in the private sector, the average is around 2.3% of the workforce. So that might be a benchmark that you as employers would want to look at in terms of your own workforce. Actually, 100% of you said that you know you're going to pay it, and actually you know broadly how much you're going to pay. So I'm going to skip over this fairly quickly. But if you have a pay bill in excess of 3 million, then you will pay 0.5% of that in excess of 3 million as an apprenticeship levy. It applies to all employers in all sectors. But it applies to about 2% of employers, and we think across the UK that will be about 22,000 employers will actually pay the levy, and about 400 employers will actually pay about 50% of the total levy. Not only will you have the opportunity to reinvest the levy that you have contributed, but for all of those employers in England, you will be able to get more out than you've actually paid into the levy, with an additional 10% top-up applied to the funds that are within your digital account. So here's a worked example showing that the different situations of employers so that you can understand how the levy is applied across the board, with the levied employer with the 250 staff paying around 10,000 and the employer with about 100 staff paying nothing. We think around about between 100 and 150 employees is probably the point by which employers will start paying the levy.
Karen, can I just ask, is the 10% top up just for England, or is it for all employers?
It is only for England, because as we'll touch on this, it is only England where the levy is reinvested back into people's digital accounts. So just touching on this, because I know a number of you are UK-based businesses, but just to reaffirm, the apprenticeship levy is, the easiest way to describe this is the UK levy is calculated through general taxation, and general taxation is the responsibility of the UK government. It can determine what it taxes and how much it taxes. And the levy is therefore a UK-wide applied levy taxation on all employers in the UK. The levy, because skills is a devolved administration issue, then it is up for the devolved administrations of Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland to decide what to do with skills within their country. And those of you who are already involved in apprenticeships would know that actually apprenticeships in Northern Ireland and in Scotland are different to those in England. The Welsh system is much more aligned to the English system. But what will happen with your levy is you will pay for all of the employees you have in the UK on your pay bill. You will get back in your digital account the proportion of your employees who have an English postcode. And that will be determined directly from your pay-as-you-earn records that HMRC already have in their possession. So we do have some instruments towards the back where you can actually start working out what you think your English fraction of the levy may well be. But how you access the fund is through a new digital service on gov.uk. It's not currently available, but we do expect people will start to be able to register on this towards the end of the year and to have a little play with the service before it goes live in April or May time. So all of the money will be collected through your real-time information delivered to HMRC. A proportion, the 0.5% of your pay bill, will be moved from general taxation into your digital account. And then we will apply the English fraction. So you will see back in your English account, your digital account, the proportion of the levy for your English workforce. I have to say, for anything in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, you will need to speak to the relevant devolved administrations about their approach to investing in apprenticeships so that you can look to see how best you get the return that you need on Wales, Northern Ireland or Scottish workforces. So, purchasing training, you will have your new digital account. Included in that, and it will look a little bit like a bank account. It will say how much money is being paid in each month. And from the 1st of May, we say the 1st of May because the first collection of your digital, of your levy will be on the 1st for the April payroll. And that will then show up in your digital account with effect from the 1st of May. And that means that you, as employers, have total control over the apprenticeship levy, where you spend it, with whom you spend it, and the types of apprenticeships that you want to buy. So you will be able to commit to apprenticeship starts from the beginning of May, and you can do that after you've selected a provider and chosen the right apprenticeship standard or framework for your workforce. And by committing to apprenticeship training through your digital account, you will be able to enter into a contract agreement with the provider of your choice, off our register of apprenticeship training providers. Once you've committed the training funds will automatically leave your digital account on a monthly basis, spread across the lifetime of the apprenticeship. So you don't need to worry about making the payments. Behind the scenes, the Skills Funding Agency will be making the payments to your chosen provider on your behalf. But what you will be able to see is the cash flow, money in and money out, so you can keep track of what's happening, whether you've got more money to invest in apprenticeships or if you actually want to spend a bit more. And I'll touch on how you can spend a bit more later on in the presentation. All of you are going to be paying the levy, but there will be, as I say, 98% of employers in the UK won't be paying the levy. And therefore, for those employers in England, the Skills Funding Agency will continue to contract with training providers to deliver services to those employers. So employers who don't pay the levy will still get access to apprenticeship training. They'll just do it through a slightly different route for the first couple of years. So, what can you spend your digital account money on? It can be used to pay for apprenticeship training and for assessment. That needs to be against an approved apprenticeship framework or an approved apprenticeship standard. And it needs to be with an approved training provider and assessment organisation, up to the funding band maximum for that particular apprenticeship framework or standard. Now, we will be doing a complete review of apprenticeship training providers, and we will be producing a brand new register of quality assured training providers that you will be able to invest your levy with. You cannot spend your levy with any organisation who is not on that register of approved training providers. And that's really to try and offer some due diligence and support to you as employers to make sure that you get good organisations with a track record of delivering good apprenticeship training. What you can't spend your levy, your digital account funds on, are wages, because they are expected to be paid by the employer, any travel or subsistence costs for your apprentices or for your trainers, or any managerial costs that you might have. That might be a mentor or line manager or supervisor for your apprentices. You cannot use your levy if you participate in the traineeship programme or if you're involved in any other work placement programmes, or for the cost of setting up your apprenticeship programme. So it can pay for external apprenticeship training and assessment with approved providers against approved frameworks or standards. So this is a kind of swim lane of how the system will work. We briefly talked about HMRC collecting the levy through pay-as-you-earn. Your digital account for your English fraction is available for you to see, plus your 10% top-up. You as the employer commit to apprenticeship training for either staff within your organisation that need to develop their skills or for any new recruits. And you commit to training those apprentices against an approved training, against an approved apprenticeship framework or a standard. The apprentice, by this time, when you have committed to that, and it will be seen on your digital account, the apprentice starts getting their training, and we will, through the Skills Funding Agency, make the payments to the providers, taking the money from your digital account. And any unused funds in your account will expire at the end of 18 months. And you'll be able to see that in your digital account, and we will always use the oldest money first to try and protect as much of your money so you can invest it well within the 18 months expiry period. So for the training provider, they would register with the Skills Funding Agency, they would be on the register of apprenticeship training providers. You would contract with one of those people and they would commit to delivering the training. Once they start delivering the training, we will make regular payments to them until you tell us that you want to stop. Either the apprentice has stopped or the apprenticeship has completed. And we will make the final balance to the apprentice provider when we are clear that all of the apprenticeship training has been delivered. And underneath there you can see, you will always be able to see what's going on with your account.
Karen, on that, we just had a question coming in. The question is, will we be able to use our funds for third-party apprenticeships? Third-party apprentices, for example, our clients or supply chain.
Not at this moment, but there is an intention that you will be able to do that in the future. And we expect that will be during some time in 2018. But the policy isn't worked through sufficiently well enough for us to be able to offer that facility straight from May 17. But we are expecting that it will come online sometime in 2018. So for the next year, once the levy goes live in April, for the next year and probably a year and a half, then you really need to invest your apprenticeship levy in the development of your own staff. And then keep a watching brief for when the policy changes, and you will be able to invest money in clients, supply chain, third-party organisations, but not at this moment.
And another question for you both is as well, Cassandra, I'd love to get your viewpoint on this. Can you provide details on whether the levy can fully fund the administration if a training provider is used?
Well, that depends really on what you negotiate with the training provider, because it is a negotiation. And actually there's a slide a bit later on where we can touch upon this. But once you've agreed the price for the training, it may well be that that price is within the maximum funding band, in which case your levy fully funds it. If for some reason you're negotiating an uprated programme to deliver the apprenticeship standard or the framework, you want more maybe from the provider than might be the norm, you can negotiate that. But if that price takes you above the maximum band for that apprenticeship standard, then you can't use your levy for the additional bit. You have to put your own cash in. But it is entirely up to you to negotiate a rate with the training provider. At this moment in time, because part of the things we've done is just announce new funding rates, training providers are trying to work out whether or not they can deliver a good quality programme within the funds available. What we do think is that the new apprenticeship standards, they are, I think, more generously funded than the old apprenticeship frameworks. And that's because we believe, and employers tell us this, that new standards are far better for the employer, far better for the apprentice, and that they are better suited to the needs of the employer. And in part, the way we funded frameworks is really to help nudge both employers and providers to start delivering the new apprenticeship standards, because we believe they are better for business, and that's what employers say as well.
Yeah, just echoing Karen's comments there, that we fully expect that under the new Trailblazer standards that we would be including the administration as part of our package up to the top of the cap.
And it's something we're going to touch on later on in this presentation, is that how BBA members could potentially collaborate in reducing any administration or any costs as well. And we'd love to sense check it with yourselves and whether that, as a consortium of members, pooling that together, pooling the possible levy together, may be appropriate or suitable to ensure that we get the best deal for our member organisations as well. Sorry, Karen, I interrupted you.
No, fine. Just moving on to a kind of 5 easy steps to managing your apprenticeship. You will, well, most of you know how much you're going to pay on your apprenticeship, through your levy, sorry. We do have current lists of prices for apprenticeships. So actually you could look now, they might change marginally, but you could have a look now at the kind of apprenticeships you would be interested in your business and work out whether or not you've got enough money in your Levy account to fund all the apprenticeships you've got or you want, or it may well be that actually you've got more money to invest and you might want to consider how best you invest that, both in new recruits or existing staff. You will be able to choose a training provider, an assessment organisation, and the digital apprenticeship service will enable you to do this quite easily by searching for the standard that you're interested in, and it will give you a drop-down box of all of the providers who deliver those apprenticeships. So you'll be able to choose a provider, or you can go with the strategic partner training provider you already have. You can advertise to recruit for an apprentice on the digital apprenticeship service, or you can use a range of different ways to recruit, but the service on the new digital apprenticeship site will be free to employers, and it always has about 25,000 vacancies at any time and about 1 million people looking throughout those vacancies. You can manage your funding through the digital apprenticeship service, so it'll be a secure site, only you will be able to see your account. You'll be able to view your balance, forecast your funding for the future, and find out whether you need more support or additional monies if you haven't got enough money in your Levy pot. It will also give you some sample apprenticeship contracts that you can use when you choose your training provider. So it should be a kind of one-stop shop for any organisation looking at recruiting or training somebody through an apprenticeship. So from the 12th of August, the government published further proposals and more details on the funding model. The deadline for feedback was yesterday, but I'm sure if a number of you wanted to do some feedback today, you would still be able to do so, and you can do that through the gov.uk site. And here are the kind of funding bands that we've got. An apprenticeship can be anything between, at the lower end, £1,500. They're really for old frameworks, right up to £27,000, and a number of the level 6s and 7s within the banking standards are in the upper end of the apprenticeship funding. So you will be able to, through a link on gov.uk, find out what standards exist, what frameworks exist, and how much money is allocated as a maximum cost for each of those apprenticeships. So you can do your own working out before you start the programme. And this is really just telling you about how we've gone about things. We're in the middle of a transition away from old frameworks, which have served employers and individuals well, to new apprenticeship standards. And the new standards are bigger, better, and much more focused on employer needs. So we have weighted monies more strongly towards standards than we have for frameworks. And what this does is it tells you how we went about it. And to some extent, we picked the current adult rate as the benchmark for the monies that we should pay. And then we've added additional monies in if that framework is in particular STEM subject areas, recognising that there is greater demand, and currently employers have been making contributions to those frameworks. So that's how we've worked out the framework rates. The standard rates, this gives you an indication of how we've done standards. Each standard is allocated into a funding band. We did only have 6 funding bands before, and we've now stretched that out to 15. But the vast majority of standards are really in funding band 5 and above. And certainly I think nearly all of the banking ones are in funding band 5 and above. So we talked a little bit about who pays the levy. Now there are 2 types of employers. Employers who haven't paid the levy but still want to purchase apprenticeship training, or there may well be levy-paying employers who don't have enough money in their digital account to pay for all of their apprenticeship training. That might be because you've only got a small levy pot, or it could be that your demand for apprenticeship is significant and you want to do more than the money in your levy account. And the way additional funds, so all of your levy payers, so if you wanted to buy more apprenticeships than you've got levy funding for, you can do, and you do that at a heavily discounted rate. So in fact, government will pay 90% of the cost of anything above your levy, and you only have to pay a 10% cash contribution. So that's really helpful for those of you that might have marginal levy funds, or where you really want an embedded, solid, large program across your business. It means you will only have to pay 10p in the pound for every apprenticeship delivered over your digital account limit. And this gives you an indication, a kind of worked example of what happens. And this also touches on whether or not the agreement with your training provider is within the funding band limit or outside. And we would expect all providers really to include the management of the apprenticeship program on your behalf within the normal funding bands. But that may well be something that you want to negotiate. So on the left-hand side, you've got a funding band limit of 6,000. The price you've negotiated with the training provider is 5,000, and therefore that's fine, it's within the limit. If you've got enough money in your account, then the whole of the 5,000 will be funded from your digital account. If you haven't got enough money in your account, then actually government will pay 90% of the 5,000 that you've negotiated, and therefore you would only have to pay £500, i.e. the 10%. If you're over the funding band limit, so actually you've negotiated a Rolls-Royce apprenticeship, kind of really you want bells and whistles along with your apprenticeship, and you've agreed with the training provider that the cost of the apprenticeship is £7,500. Now this would be above the funding band limit for this apprenticeship. Therefore, £6,000 would be deducted from your digital account over the lifetime of the apprenticeship, and you would have to pay the additional £1,500 in cash outside of the digital account directly to the training provider. Similarly, if you haven't got enough money in your digital account, we would still pay 90% of the £6,000, which would be the funding band limit. You would have to pay £600 through the digital account, and then also pay an additional £1,500. So that gives you a reasonably worked example about what could happen in a number of different situations, dependent on whether you negotiate below the band or above the band, whether or not you've got enough money in your digital account, or whether or not you need to top up with your own funds.
Sort of question coming in there, Karen, from a delegate. When paying the 10% for additional funds, is there a maximum amount this will cover?
No, it's entirely up to you to negotiate the rate. So, I'll reword. I'll go back to the question. If you're talking about the 10p in the pound that government has agreed, then it's within the same arrangements as any other apprenticeship. So it can only fund the kind of things that we said it could fund before. So the issue would be you've run out of money, you want to take on another apprentice, and the funding band is £6,000. Actually, the negotiated price you've got with the training provider is £5,000. That would be for a normal delivery of a framework or a standard. And that provider would deliver exactly the same training for all of the apprentices. You might have 9 apprentices funded out of your digital account and 1 that you haven't got enough money for. And therefore you're only going to pay 10p in the pound for that 10th person. But they would have exactly the same training programme as everybody else. It would make no difference the fact that it had been funded from your digital account or whether it was funded on the 10p in the pound approach. It's exactly the same training, exactly the same provider, exactly the same programme. It shouldn't make any difference at all to the apprenticeship, to the apprentice, or to the employer. We also recognise that there are some additional incentives. We recognise that in trying to simplify the amount of funding, this might feel complicated, but actually having 15 funding bands is much better than the 4,500 funding bands that we've got at the moment. So it is a much simpler system. But sometimes when you try and make a system simple, there can be some losers. And those losers we want to try and address through different ways and different incentives. And some of the concerns that we've had is whether or not small employers even have to pay 10p in the pound for a young apprentice, a 16 to 18-year-old, might still find that problematic. Mm-hmm. So government is going to give a number of incentives to different categories. So if you have less than 50 employees and you want to train a 16 to 18-year-old, you don't have a levy, government will pay all 100% of the costs. And we also intend to extend that to small employers who take on 19 to 24-year-old apprentices who have formerly been in care or have a local authority education, health and care plan. And in those cases, even though they're older, they might be up to 24 years of age, government will still fully fund the 16 to 18 apprentice. So we've got another worked example here, really around people with less than 50 employees. So many of you won't fit in that category, but just to give you an indication, particularly if you're talking to some of your clients who might be worried about this, if you've got less than 50 and you're taking on a 16 to 18-year-old, then government will pay the 100% up to the funding band limit. So our previous example was £6,000 funding band limit. You negotiate 5,000. If you're a small employer, you haven't got any levy, you're taking on a 16 to 18-year-old or you're training a 16 to 18-year-old, you won't have to pay any of the cost. Government will pay the lot. If you negotiate a price over the funding band limit, i.e. the 7,500, and you're taking on a 16 to 18-year-old and you employ less than 50 people, government will pay the 6,000 in full. You still have to pay your £1,500. So here's some indications of the additional support available. So actually, irrespective of size of company, if you recruit or if you train a 16 to 18-year-old through an apprenticeship, you as the employer will get £1,000 cash incentive actually not necessarily towards training, it's a cash incentive for the fact that you have chosen to recruit or train a 16 to 18-year-old apprentice. The training provider also gets £1,000 additional funds in recognition that sometimes 16 to 18-year-olds bring some baggage and need some additional help and support. If you've got teenagers, you will understand exactly what I mean. But it is in recognition that there may well be additional costs incurred in recruiting and training a 16 to 18-year-old. There is also that additional money, irrespective again of the size of the organisation, if the individual is aged between 19 to 24, has either been a care leaver or has a local authority education and healthcare plan. So actually, usually people with disabilities or people with learning difficulties would have an education and healthcare plan. And again, the £1,000 applies both to the employer and to the training provider in that case. If you do have an apprentice that has need of additional learning support, whether they might have learning difficulties or disabilities or dyslexia, then we will pay directly, not from your digital account, but directly to training providers up to an extra £150 a month to support those apprentices with their additional needs. And if you have any apprentices that have not achieved the minimum standard of level 2 in English and Maths, then they can study to achieve their level 2 in English and Maths, and that will be funded directly, not from your levy, but directly from the Skills Funding Agency to the training provider. So a range of support for people with disabilities or learning difficulties, but also recognising additional cash incentives and support to employers who recruit and train 16 to 18-year-olds or people who are disadvantaged. We talked a little bit before about can you spend your money on third-party organisations, and what we're saying is that will happen. You will be able to transfer your funds sometime during 2018. The current view is that you will be able to transfer up to 10% of your levy funds to third-party organisations, whether they're clients, supply chain, or whether or not you're working with an approved training organisation. Training association, sorry. So you might not directly employ the apprentices, a third party employs them on your behalf, and you should be able to spend up to 10% of your levy funds on those areas. I think of keen interest, we think, particularly to the banking sector, is the idea that prior qualifications don't necessarily mean that you can't get an apprenticeship. Previously, if you had a degree, then you couldn't be funded as an apprentice. That is going to change as part of these rules coming in from April next year, and you will be able to use funds in your account or any of the 10p and the pound funds to train individuals to take an apprenticeship at a higher level of qualification than they already hold, or if an individual can be funded for an apprenticeship at the same level or lower than the qualification that they hold. So this could be you've got degree entrance and you want to do management qualifications with them, then that will be allowable under the new system. It isn't currently allowable. You can train them as apprentices, but you can't normally get government funding to support that training. And we think that will be a significant opportunity for a number of employers, particularly if you have got graduate entrance. You can consider whether or not you want to do graduate apprenticeships, the degree apprenticeships instead, but you may also have a graduate intake that you want to do some other apprenticeship-specific skills that you can do. So having a degree doesn't prevent you.
So if I get it straight, Karen, if I'm an accountant who's done a degree at university, accountancy degree at university, could I do under an apprenticeship an accountancy qualification from that?
I think the argument would be, do you need that? If you've already got the accountancy qualification, then getting an apprenticeship accountancy qualification probably wouldn't help. But sometimes you might do a degree, but it doesn't give you the workplace skills to be able to apply that knowledge and to do accounts. So it can, as long as the job that you're being trained for is materially different than maybe your current qualification, then you can get support through. So the easiest way is somebody's done maybe mathematics, a degree in maths, but then wants to do accountancy qualifications. Or it could be that you could come in with an accountant's qualification, come in to be an accountant through your degree, but actually what the organisation wants you is to be a leader, and therefore they actually want you to do the management qualifications. And that actually can be at level 6 and 7, but there are some other lower management qualifications. So it tends to be that we don't want to duplicate the learning that you've got. What the apprenticeship should be doing is giving you additional workplace skills that will make you really productive and of benefit to the employer.
And who's likely to decide that, Karen, in terms of whether or not the training is materially different? Will that be up to the employer and the training provider, or would you have to sort of demonstrate that too?
You have to. I think it will be up to the employer and the training provider. It will be subject to. We already have these kind of arrangements with existing apprenticeships. I think that you need to have a rationale about why you're doing it, because at some stage they could be subject to an audit from the Skills Funding Agency, and we just need to understand what was the rationale why somebody with, a management degree got in university came and did a management degree in the apprenticeship program. So this is not. It's not meant to be seen as a way that you just spend your levy, because actually why would you want to put somebody through something if they're not really going to add any value to your business? But this is really to recognise that people do sometimes make different career choices. They may well have had a degree, but what they want to go and do, actually you could have a degree in history and decide to be a hairdresser, and the hairdresser qualification is at level 3. There's absolutely no reason why somebody shouldn't have that decision about a career change should they want to. Cross-border issues, we touched on a bit earlier on about the English fraction. And what we are trying to do is to simplify the current rules and apply a single test to whether apprenticeship training can be funded through the English system. And it will be broadly based on where the apprentice's main place of employment is. And if that main place of employment is England, then you will be able to use your English fraction within your digital account to fund that apprenticeship training. I talked a bit about feedback, so we've got until it was yesterday, but there's still an opportunity to have your say on these things. This isn't the final bit of information. We're going to take the feedback that we receive, and then we're going to finalise, by the end of October, we will finalise the funding for apprenticeships. We will produce a full set of technical rules that underpin the funding system. That will be actually probably more of interest to Cassandra than it may well be to you. And we will confirm how the proportion of the pay bill that's applied to employees living in England will be calculated. And then in December, there will be further guidance for employers from Revenue and Customs about how to calculate and pay the apprenticeship levy.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. I don't doubt that you're probably going to get inundated with a few questions on that as well. We'd just like to ask one question before I hand over to Cassandra, and it is on your screen now. You'll see a pop-up appearing shortly. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being no progress and 5 being on track, how much progress do you think has your firm made in advance of the levy implementation? And it's quite interesting to see the results on that.
Wow.
50-50 split. Cassandra, Karen, what thoughts on that?
Actually, that's better than a number of groups of employers that I've seen. I don't think you're running. I think you've still got time to make a positive impact on being prepared for the levy. But I think what I would be saying is you need to start now. I think if you leave it much longer, then you'll end up with, I think, a period of time where your levy is kind of sitting in the account not doing much. And it can take a number of months to get your programme off the ground. So if you're not actively involved in this and you want to be, then I think now is the time to kind of start taking some action.
Good. Cassandra.
Excellent. Okay. So, hi everybody. And obviously, Karen gave a very comprehensive presentation there. So, I'm just going to go through a few slides really, just in terms of how you can prepare for the levy. So, I guess just leading on from Philip's question there with how prepared you feel that you are already, maybe then how you can make those final preparations to make sure that you're fully prepared for when the levy started to be collected in April. So we put this flowchart together here just in terms of sort of trying to think about how you can prepare for the levy. So it's quite a simple one, but hopefully it's quite effective. So first of all, really, we're advising our employers to think about whether or not you actually have a current apprenticeship or indeed a graduate scheme. So as Karen's just pointed out, with the sort of relaxing of the funding rules so that graduates are now able to undertake an apprenticeship if it's in something that's, different from their degree subject, then it is worth looking at your graduate schemes and thinking about whether or not they could be converted to a relevant apprenticeship framework or standard. More likely it would be a standard in the new world, but that's something to consider. So if you do currently have an apprenticeship or indeed graduate scheme, then you can now, particularly given that those provisional funding bands have been published, you can actually estimate your apprenticeship spend. And there is a really useful tool on the government's website, and I've provided the link there to help you estimate your spend, looking at the type of apprenticeships and graduate programmes that you currently engage with. So if you estimate your apprenticeship spend, then you see that, asking the question, will you spend your levy pot? If by some miracle that you will spend your levy pot and it's exact, then congratulations, you should elevate yourself from a 2 to a 5 in terms of that last question, and your strategy is effectively levy ready. If you will spend your levy pot and indeed you'll overspend, then you will go into that, marginal levy payer category that Karen talked about earlier on in the presentation. So this obviously means that you want to do more apprenticeship training than your levy funds would enable you to, and therefore you'd go into that co-contribution category where the government would pay 90% of your additional training and you would then need to pay the extra 10%. And if you're not going to spend your levy pot, so the current training that you undertake is not going to be enough to fully utilise the levy pot, then that's where you need to consider whether or not you want to grow your scheme. On the next slide, we'll give you some ideas as to how you might do that. If we just then go to the right-hand side of the flow chart there, so you don't currently have an apprenticeship scheme, you don't have a graduate scheme, or you don't have a graduate scheme that can be converted to an apprenticeship, then what we would be advising you to do is to look through those apprenticeship standards. So again, they're available on the government's website. We can send a link for you to have a look at those that are either available for delivery now or indeed are in development. And look to see whether any of those could be relevant to your organisation. So certainly working in banking, I know that there are many apprenticeship standards out there that I am absolutely positive would be relevant to you. So if you're looking and saying that actually those standards, yes, they do map to job roles within your organisation, and you would want to spend your levy, so this is something you're interested in, then obviously engage with a provider, work with a provider, or with the BBA to understand how these could then work for you, so how you can actually get that apprenticeship scheme up and running. If, and I don't think this would necessarily be the case, but if you look and actually think none of those apprenticeship standards apply to your organisation at all, there's nothing there that maps to job roles, then it might be the case you want to actually consider forming a trailblazer group yourself. So you need to find an additional 9 employers to come together and actually say there is a job role here, there's not a standard in development at the moment, but we really believe that there is a need for an apprenticeship standard for apprentices to actually perform in that job role. So, that might be a consideration, again, if you do want to spend your levy. Okay, so just a few considerations then that you might want to be considering just in tandem with that previous slide. So Karen's already mentioned this, but obviously if you are sitting there with a large levy pot and you don't necessarily want to take on lots of new recruits into your organisation, then it's absolutely worth looking at your existing workforce and whether or not there are apprenticeships available that would enable you to upskill them. We've already touched on this, so I'll be very brief, but clearly now we do have the additional flexibility of being able to put graduates onto an apprenticeship programme. So, whether or not that's something that you would be considering for your organisations. I've put there, level 6, level 7, which is a degree equivalent apprenticeships, but, it might even be the case that if a graduate's done something in a totally irrelevant subject, then they could even do an apprenticeship at level 3 and level 4. Just sort of working down clockwise, looking at enriching the programme. So Karen's mentioned this already, but, if you have got a very generous cap for your apprenticeship standard, and actually the training, the sort of basic training doesn't cover the cap, then it might be you do want that Rolls-Royce apprenticeship and you do want to, put additional training in there. So whether that might be IT training, for instance, or some type of business challenge or simulation. And again, that's something that you could be considering. The Levy spend modelling, I'm conscious of time, I'll run through that quite quickly with you, but just something I've been working with employers on is just remembering that many apprenticeships nowadays last for longer than 12 months. So it is just worth bearing that in mind when you are sort of planning your levy spend, because it might be, you might need to get sort of 3 years in until you get to that sort of final, final position. There is a possibility that you could bring your training in-house, and again, there's quite a lot of detail available on the government's website as to how you could potentially become an employer provider, and again, that might be something you want to consider. And finally, and I think almost most importantly, it's just thinking about that cultural fit of apprenticeships and getting that senior manager buy-in. I've worked in apprenticeships for the last 5 years, and whenever employers say to me, what's the key to making my apprenticeship scheme a success, I always say make sure your managers have bought into it. You really do need that line manager buy-in to make the apprenticeship scheme a really successful one and work. So just quickly then, hopefully the slides are self-explanatory, but it's just sort of illustrating, if you like, this modelling your levy spend. So for simplicity's sake, I've just looked at an apprenticeship which lasts 24 months. Many apprenticeships at level 4, so the accountancy one, for instance, is designed to last that long. And let's say then that you have an intake in September every year. So you bring in, however many apprentices each year in September. Then obviously if you're looking at the tax year, you're effectively 6 months in until your new recruits are going to join. So in that year one of your intake, you've effectively got 7 months of the apprenticeship. And then if we move into the second tax year, then that first intake that you've brought in, they're going to be on that apprenticeship programme for 12 months. And then you're going to bring in a second intake, because you have an annual intake of apprentices. And again, you've got 7 months worth of them having apprenticeship training. And then you move into year 3. So that very first intake that you brought in, they're going to finish their apprenticeship off now, so they've got an additional 5 months in that tax year 3. You've then got that second intake that you brought in, they've got the full 12 months again. And then because, remember, you've got this annual intake, you've then got a third intake coming in, and again, they've got 7 months for that tax year. So in year 3, you've effectively got 3 cohorts, if you like, of apprentices that are going to be using your levy spend. And again, just to be nice and simple, on the next slide, I've tried to put some numbers in there just to sort of help you see how you're going to build up then to that final levy position. So again, if we're using the 24 months example, this time then I've said, okay, you're bringing in 30 apprentices every year, so that's your annual intake. And again, for argument's sake, we're just saying that you've agreed a price of £9,000. So it's in cap 9, and you've agreed the price of the provider up to the cap. So that would be £375 a month, effectively, the £9,000 over the 24 months of the apprenticeship programme. And then again, it's just working it through. So in the first tax year, you've got that first intake, remembering they're going to do 7 months. So you've got 7 months worth of those 30 apprentices. And then you're literally just building it up. So in year 2, again, you've got that first intake for 12 months, the second intake for 7 months. So you can see there your levy spend's gone up to 213,750. And then in this example, when you get to year 3, you've got that final pattern. And that effectively means that your total and sort of final levy spend would be 270,000. So again, it's just worth bearing that in mind, that that first year might not necessarily be representative of what you're going to be spending on the levy into the future, and you do sort of need to think through that modelling. So I'm really conscious of time, and the final slide then is really just sort of looking at different ways your training providers should be able to help you. So I won't go through all of this. Hopefully it's quite self-explanatory there, but lots of different ways your provider can help you move, I guess, if you do feel that you're at a 2 or 3 on that scale, up to a 5, with things such as helping you with recruitment, helping you manage your levy, helping you think about, upskilling your workforce. So I'd really urge you, if you do have any questions, to speak to your providers, or obviously speak to Philip here at the BBA, who can put you in touch with providers and really sort of help you get fully prepared then for when the levy comes in April. Okay.
Thanks very much, Cassandra. Yeah, indeed we're up against it. But definitely to take the conversation onwards, we have, and Cassandra alongside Mike Thompson at Barclays will be running a workshop on the 24th of October for your diary, to really working out some of these scenarios and some of the challenges that organisations and firms amongst our membership are facing on the apprenticeship levy. And certainly I'll be pushing those details out. An on-demand version of the slide deck will be available to yourselves by the close of play today. I know that a number of yourselves wanted links as well to various documents that Karen and Cassandra were referring to. Also, at the end of the back of the slide pack, slide deck, you'll see I've also inserted an appendices of where you can refer to Cassandra and Karen directly if you do have any questions. We don't have time to do the last survey question, I feel that, but as I said earlier, we are looking to see whether a number of members or a number of organisations would consider at this time to reducing the administration cost and also the support and time that banks would need to start off their first apprenticeship scheme in collaboration with a number of members. And to that extent, we would love your opinions, love your thoughts on that. So I'll be sending out an email just to sense check that against what we could do as the BBA for yourselves, indeed. If you do have any questions, I will definitely be able to answer them in the next couple of hours, and I'll also move those on to Karen and Cassandra. Thank you very much indeed for your time. We hope that this has been insightful and thoughtful. I don't doubt, given what Karen has said and Cassandra has also highlighted, that this will be the first of many webinars on the levy and on the apprenticeships right up until April of next year. Wonderful. Have a good day. Thank you very much.